Good evening, Facebook family. Welcome to another Sunday evening session with Janice and Brian. We welcome you this Sunday evening, the Sunday before the Tuesday voters election for a lot of the counties here in Alabama. Number one, Montgomery, Alabama. Well, not Montgomery really, but Wetumpka is voting for mayor. Also, Millbrook is voting, and so is Selma, Alabama, which is my hometown. We're voting for mayor, so I'm really excited about that. And I just want to encourage you guys to get ready for a great evening. We have great information for you. And be sure that you vote. This is a local election, and this is where you can make the biggest difference, is in your local elections. And we encourage everyone to get out and vote. Okay?
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah. So what we are going to be discussing today for you guys, basically we're going to be dealing with several things. We know that, like Janice said, the voting is coming up for local elections. Also, we're going to be looking at a lot of national elections upcoming here in a couple of months as it relates to the presidential election, some of the Senate races. So we just want to encourage everybody, like Janice said, to get out, to vote, exercise that right, and we'll discuss more in the coming months as it relates to voting, how we can affect the election as it relates to voting. We'll deal with that in the upcoming months. We'll explain before the presidential election the actual electoral process concerning the Electoral College, and how a president is actually selected.
Selected, yes.
Not elected.
But selected.
But selected. So we'll deal with a couple of those things and just kind of educate you. We'll also go through the history of the candidates. Joe Biden, we'll talk about a little bit about Trump's record in his 4 years. And then so you can make an informed decision and you can choose based on who you feel
be the best candidate.
Yeah, be the best candidate and support the issues that you have. All right, so awesome. So today we are going to be discussing something that's very, very relative to not only voting, but to our existence as it relates to just being in this country, existing in this country. So we're going to talk about the actual concept of racism today and how it actually developed. So I'm going to let Janice give her thoughts as it relates to racism and how she feels that is relative to what's happening today, what we're seeing with the movement of Black Lives Matter. Not only Black Lives Matter, but even the US movement has kind of drawn from some of these things. So I'm gonna let Janice kind of take it and then I'll discuss and give you kind of just a historical background.
Yeah. Well, everybody has a formative image in their mind of a racist incident that has happened to them, being African American. I grew up in a small town, Selma, Alabama, and I have to be honest, and I tell people this all the time. I did not experience racism, to my knowledge, until I ventured off to college in Birmingham, Alabama, at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. There were multiple incidents of encountering racism there. Also, when I came back home to nurse in my hometown of Vaughan Regional Medical Center, which at that time was Selma Medical Center, being a registered nurse, and very few Black registered nurses were there at that time, I did experience quite a bit of racism when it came to positioning on jobs. And also, now that I am an adult, I see it much more vividly now. A lot of us that grew up in smaller towns, we now are not seeing it as much, but we're hearing more about it. So we're being more cognizant of it. Even when you're going in stores, Walmart, Dollar General, wherever you go, your grocery stores, we are very aware and how vivid this thing is in our minds now, and how it has in some way affected us or someone close to us or our children. What I see now is in television, I see where a lot of commercials are always pairing African Americans with white Americans or Caucasians, especially where it comes to black men with white women. I don't have a choice in whatever anybody prefers, but what I do want you to be aware, what I am more conscious of, is that I know that at the end of the day, when all the dust settles, I am still an African American, and so is that person. And we have to be mindful of that, especially those of us that are having, that have children and grandchildren now. They are choosing their own paths, and a lot of them are choosing to be with someone of the opposite nationality. Don't you agree, Brian?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
go ahead.
So what I'm in saying that, we in Christianity, everybody teaches that we have to love everybody the same, treat everybody equally, and so forth. But at the end of the day, I look at us, we are African Americans, and we do want to see those that are close to us and that are dear to us with those that are like us, because I believe it does eventually make a difference.
Oh, absolutely, it makes a difference. Okay, so let's get to the kind of nuts and bolts of it. Let's talk about the development of racism. The whole concept of race was developed and started in the 16th and 17th century. Mm-hmm. So that would have been the early 1500s up through the 1600s. The whole concept of race started based on the Catholic Church and the Protestant movement, which more so was the John Calvinist movement, what we're calling Protestant movement, when they actually began to debate the subject of whether African people had a soul or not. So the whole concept of race started from the church debating about African people being a people that was humane enough to actually have a soul. From that debate, what developed out of that debate was the church eventually drawn the conclusion that Africans did not have the same soul as European people, and therefore could be used as animals, could be used as a form of chattel in the service to white people. Okay, so that's where the initial concept of race began. From that point, 1500s, early 1600s, after that debate and conclusion was drawn, the Pope signs an edict, and from that edict, slaves began, the European early settlers began to enslave African people, take African people from the African continent, and to use them in the service to white people. So we see that the espousing of race comes from the concept of Africans being less than human as it relates to white people. So we have to deal with that. We have to deal with that because that is a fact when you talk about what we see today, what's being espoused today. People toss around the word racism, and we know that the IS, the ism on the end, simply means that it's something that's foregoing, something that continues, ongoing, something that is still propagated and still exists today. So when we talk about racism, when they put the ISM on it, it means that it's still something that is established, that has been established, and something that will continue to be looked at, and something that will continue to be viewed as a form of the norm in society. And I think we have to come to grips with the terms that the church was the one that instituted what we know today as race, because prior to then, skin color had no factor as it relates to the ethnic or ethnicity of a people group. So skin color only came into play as it relates to the debate on whether or not African people, and not only African people, but indigenous people of North and South America had souls. This was a heavy debate simply because as the settlers began to venture out and discover new lands, as the Christopher Columbus and some of the earlier navigators that actually explored, that was paid by the church to go and find new land,
yes,
to go and seek out places of resources, slaves came into play. Simply because you cannot settle a new land without some form of labor. You cannot settle a new place without having a workers' base.
Okay.
So that institution of race and what we call racism was developed as it relates to the need by the church to enrich itself. That's in simple form.
So basically, Brian, what you're saying is that they were sent out by the church, the navigators, which were Caucasian,
the explorers,
Europeans,
and the navigators. Right.
In doing that, they had to have African Americans, slaves with them, to go in and prepare the land, to work the land once they got on it.
Yes.
To prepare the land
for... What we know is they necessarily have to have prepared, but the way that the church looked at the whole concept of development and enriching itself was by being able to go into another land and to actually subdue the land.
Take over.
To subdue the land, you had to do three things. If there were natives there, you had to actually change the mindset of the natives, which means if they didn't speak their language, the language had to be changed or either interpreted it, and you had to give them the concept of God being Savior as it relates to the explorers and the settlers' God being the supreme God. You had to not only do that, you had to convince them that you were there as peaceful or peaceful people and peaceful settlers, and that you were not there to actually pillage and rob and rape. So there was a psychological portion of racism that was actually implemented to actually subdue those native and indigenous peoples. And the same thing happened on the continent of Africa. So there was a trust factor that had to be gained in order to subdue those people that were enslaved.
Yes.
Okay. And there had to be agreements. And this is something that Basil Davison, which is a British scholar, writes a book called The African Slave Trade. And in this book, Basil Davison, he's one of the known scholars that deal with the fact that there were some tribal chiefs that were complicit with the slave traders as it relates to enslaving their people and using their people. Was told that their people were going to settle a new land and that they were going to be treated a certain type of way, that they were going to be given certain royalties as it relates to the British crown and the king. So all of those things were actually implemented to subdue a particular group of people, to use them as a workforce to settle the land. Yes. So we saw that, or we see that, because of the church conclusion that African people were less than human and could be used as chattel, it gave way to also the ideology of inferiority, superiority. It gave way to white dominance.
Yes.
It gave way to white superiority, black inferiority, white dominance, and black subservience. So we have to recognize that when you talk about today, when we look at what's happening today, white people have been conditioned and educated to understand race in the concept of color, based on a religious system, not based on a cultural system, because culturally, race was never a factor until the church made it a factor. Okay, so most of where racism is taught the most is in the church. That is why we see so many depictions of white prophets, white Jesus, white angels. That is why in the early 15th, 16th century, we know also that what's the famous painter, Michelangelo, painted a Bible, did a picture Bible that actually presented all of the prophets, God, man, woman, the angels, as European. That was for psychological conditioning. Okay. So we understand that the visual with the African people not understanding their language, there had to be something to actually psychologically change the way they thought as it related to their religious culture as opposed to the dominant culture. So the best way to do that was pictographs, to paint pictures. They understood going into Africa that Africa was an artistic people, the Africans were. And not only that, their writing format a lot of times were used in the form of pictorials. Yes. Okay, so we see that the glyphs, or what they call the Grecians call the hieroglyphs. Okay, yes. And we call it the metanetu, which means the form of writing in the Kemetic or the Egyptian. But they noticed that even when you go in some of the isolated tribes, their form of writing consisted of pictorials. So they fashioned a Bible that would be easily depicted in reference to white being the dominant group, white being the dominant people, white gods, white deities that were there to try to save the backwards and uncivilized barbarian
well, Brian,
people.
Fast forward and get us to where we are now. Well, what we're dealing with now, why are we so subservient is the underclass when it comes to getting home loans, any type of loan, bank loans, to also anything that's economically that we need.
Okay, so let's fast forward. So if we fast forward, we see that everything that was designed, in America, we have to understand that the founding fathers of this country bought into the concept of race as it was defined by the church, which simply means that when the church said that African people were less than human and did not have souls and that they could be used for cattle, the founding fathers of America bought into that concept. They bought into that ideology. And when they built this country, when they wrote the Constitution, they wrote the Constitution in a systematic way that would socially construct African people to be chattel. So,
are you saying channeled?
Chattel. Okay. Like cattle, chattel. Okay, you hear the same word. Chattel means human animals. Animals. Okay, yes. Different from cattle.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so you hear the word used in terminology as it relates to African history, as it relates to what slaves were considered to be. Okay. So that concept came, but the founding fathers of this country, to make a long story short, they bought into those concepts. So when they penned the Constitution on the construct based off of slaves being less than human and could be used for their enrichment, for their benefit, for the development of this country, for the development of many countries, not only in America, all over the world. Okay. So we know that the church reached farther than just North America, South America. We're talking about even the Isles. So we see that this concept was adopted by Europeans all over the world, French, Spaniards, Portuguese, we can go on and on. But they bought into the concept. America bought into the concept more than most.
Oh, right. I got you.
Okay. So with that being written into the Constitution, the 3/5 human clause being written into the Constitution, the whole concept of white citizenship and that you had to be European being written into the Constitution, it developed a system whereby Africans would always be at the bottom of the social economic ladder. And not only that, that Africans will always be a class of people that were lower than all other classes of people. So that's why, remember when we went through the immigration laws, we talked about in the immigration laws that the immigration laws, everybody that came into this country were considered to be white. So if you came into this country, if you were African, you were not considered to be a citizen. There was no way that you could actually gain citizenship. So that was written into the construct of this country. So what we deal with today is the same mentality of their forefathers. That Europeans today have the same mentality. It has not changed because systematically everything that has been set up, from the education system to health system to the banking system, has been systematically designed to espouse the concept that African people do not have the same wherewithal to operate as a human being would operate on a civil manner. So that is why we deal with what we deal with today from what people call a systematic design.
Yes.
But the systematic design is historical because it goes back to what the founding fathers bought into concerning the ideology of African people. Okay. And I'm gonna let you take over. I got to go get a book to read, so I will let you. I want to read this to them. But you keep talking. I'll be right back.
And you know, now with us, I'm gonna go back to the banking system. You know that we can. It is so important that we understand about how banks view us. You know, you can have the same credit score, the same income, and you can go into a bank and apply for a loan. You may not be able to get that loan, but there can come another race, a Caucasian can come in, and they can apply for that same amount, having less than you have, and they'll be able to get it. And those are some of the things that we hear from people every day, that they are encountering situations like this. It's that way with with your financial institutions, and it's also that way when it comes to job. I know several of my friends have experienced situations where they've had more qualification than their white counterpart. They've been doing that job for longer in that system, and that person ends up getting the job over them. So, and people have actually taken that to court, gone to the EEOC on that. So we have to be aware that this is still going on in our society today. As African Americans, we're still battling the race issues. So Brian has his book now. He wants to explain some things to you when it talks about the dispossessed majority.
Okay, that's the name of the book. I'm going to just hold this up so everybody can see it. It's called The Dispossessed Majority. But I just want to read this chapter. It's chapter 17 as it relates to what Mr. Wilmot Robinson. Okay, who's the author of this. And if you do research on Wilmot Robinson, that's a whole nother story. But he was bought into the evolutionary theory. Okay, so he was close friends with Sigmund Freud. So I'll have to give Wilmot Robinson's history another day. We'll talk about some of the racist people and influential people in this country that shaped the mindset of what we know as America. Okay, but let me read this. I'm gonna just read a little bit of this. Okay, it says the Negro majority, the largest and most violent minority, merits a special chapter because it confronts the United States with a problem which seems beyond solution. Feigned and overheated by both black and white agitators for often different ideological purposes, Negro racism has now reached a point where it has literally grounded the once soaring American zeitgeist, which zeitgeist simply means general intellectual and moral, cultural, I guess you would say population, okay? And it is threatening to mutilate it beyond recognition. For the first time since the pacification of the Indians, some self-anointed leaders of a minority are seriously talking about taking up arms against the authority of the state. Simultaneously, there is multiplying within the Negro community a large criminal caste, an even larger caste of welfare recipients and dehumanized drug addicts. The first Negroes to arrive in the British possessions in North America were 20 indentured servants who disembarked from a Dutch ship in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619. Blacks, it is evident, have been in America as long as the majority and longer than all other minorities except the native Indians. Overwhelmed by the white culture, Negroes quickly traded their tribal dialects for English, their tribal gods for Christianity, and their tribal names for those of their white masters, but they could not trade their skin. So, listen,
Wow.
very, very powerful, because Robinson makes the case that the Negro problem in America is the worst problem. Lincoln, before the Emancipation Proclamation, that's what the debate was about. When it came to the abolishment of slavery, it was about the Negro problem. It was about the problem of the African person existing in this country and yet having grown to the size that it was outnumbering the majority. So they feared a revolution. They feared, that's when you look at the fear as it relates to Black Lives Matter now, it is the same concept that they were dealing with 100+ years ago. Okay? They have always feared the black, and in the white's mind, blacks have always been considered to be a lower class
People.
of people group. They have always been considered to be borderline human, not fully human, because they don't possess souls as concluded by the church, and that in order to actually bring some type of civility to the African person, the African tribal people and the slaves had to adopt the American system, but were never able to fit into the American system. Okay, so they had to adopt the culture, but they were not. The system was not designed to where in the adoption they would be included in the benefits of the system. Okay, so they are adopted for a purpose and for a reason, and that is to continue to use that class of people as property for the management class, to continue to build wealth. Okay, in this and stay in control, and to keep in control a system that continues to promote and dominate black people. Okay, so all of the systems today that you have seen that are in design, even the social systems were never created for black people. That's what we don't understand. Welfare system was never created for black people. When we see in the early 1970s, when Lyndon B Johnson creates the Great Society, part of what the Great Society was formed for was to try to equalize the playing field as it relates to the economic disparity between blacks and whites. Okay, so what Lyndon B Johnson did is he put programs in place that would try to curb some of that gap. This is something that you will remember. One of those programs was work programs as it related to school-age children.
Right.
Okay.
Going to school half a day.
That's
and then
exactly
going to
right.
work the
So
other half.
if you were a product of the 80s, early 80s,
Yes.
on into the late 80s, you know that there were certain programs that were in place where in high school you could work half a day, go to school half a day.
Yeah.
Okay. That was to try to lessen the wealth gap as it relates to training African people, apprenticeship programs. All of those things have gone away now.
Yes.
Okay.
They are.
So the efforts of Lyndon B Johnson as it relates to the Civil Rights Act, okay, putting that in place. And what most people don't know about Lyndon B Johnson is prior to him actually becoming president, he ran his first campaign to become senator, and his first campaign was the promotion of lifting up black people. So in his home state of Texas, what he did was create programs to lift up black people out of the projects. So Lyndon B Johnson was sensitive to the needs of African people, because prior to him getting into office, prior to him becoming president, he actually espoused that. He actually built programs in his state to do that. So he tried to carry that over into his presidency. Sadly to say, those things were shortly lived after he didn't run for another term or whatever, and before Richard Nixon come in. Okay, yeah. All of those things were done away with, because we know that the white majority at that time, which were what we call Dixiecrats, there was the Governor Wallaces of the world, the Strom Thurmonds of the world, they tore everything down as it relates to trying to advance a race of people, okay, based on the concept of the church, trying to advance a race of people that were submarginal and that was subhuman. They tore those programs down, and basically what you'll see in some of those debates, and if you go back and you look at some of those Senate debates on the floor, they determined that African people could not be rehabilitated in this fashion. So that what they tried to do from that point is strengthen the base of African people by saying, okay, we'll put in certain programs to help educate them and allow them to work their way through the system just like everybody else. But the failure of that is we did not have the tools to actually work our way through the system. See, because the grants program were not there to aid African people to go to school at that time. Most African people could not get college grants, whereas grants were given to European children, especially children of war. That's where you have the GI Bill. All of those things were put in place to help promote what they call, quote unquote, the American dream, and to build a white middle class. Okay, so blacks didn't have a class. Blacks were at the bottom. They were the lower class. They were considered the peasants or the commoner, okay, in this country, and were not entitled systematically to the same rights and benefits that the middle class citizen had rights to, based on the government putting programs in place to build and to stabilize the so-called white middle class. Okay, so we'll stop there, and if you want to comment on that, that's a lot to kind of
digest. But it's needed, and like I said, it is so needed, and that is what we got to do when we go out and vote locally. We got to look at the platform. We don't just vote for somebody because we know them or they're our friends or they're from the same hometown or whatever. We got to look at what are you going on? What is it that you plan to do for us? What is it you plan to do for African Americans? We need so many things put in place now. We also need to not forget, we need to put that reparations out there. That is not going away. We still want to get that out there. And I think now with the Black Lives Matter movement, people are getting so caught up in that and protesting, they're kind of backwashing the reparations. We don't want to forget about that, because that is needed, that is owed to us.
Yeah, reparations has got to be the center of everything that we do from this point moving forward. Now, how it is actually developed is up for discussion, but we need to push that, because the only way to lessen the blow to our people is by bringing them up to the same economic level as everybody else.
Exactly.
Okay, so the great majority of our people are living below the poverty line.
Yes,
they're living in what we so-called third world country conditions. Okay, so and they are not receiving the benefits that everybody that, let me just say this, that the white majority in the Senate proposed that they are receiving. Okay, so a lot of the welfare, all of those things, we know that never reaches impoverished black communities. And most blacks cannot live off of the little assistance that they get.
No, they cannot.
Okay, so we could make another case for that being 30%, 35% of why crime is so high in our communities. Okay, so we have to continue to stay on the wall, so to speak, as it relates to reparations. It's got to be at the center of everything that we do, everything that we look at. We cannot abandon the fact that if you don't repair the wall that's been breached, and our wall was breached when our ancestors were taken out of the mother country, brought to this country, enslaved, and then deemed as less than humans, and that they would be the servants and the chattel to build wealth for the Europeans and the slave masters of this country. That wall was breached. So we have to repair that wall. We have to get that wall. We have to plug it so that the bleeding stops.
Yes.
And then we have to repair our people and bring them up to the same economic level that everybody else has been enjoying off of the backs of our ancestors that labored and contributed to 95% of the wealth of this country. So we like to say that our people, America was built on the back of slaves, yes, but more so than that, the wealth of America is on the backs of the slaves.
Yes.
Wall Street would not exist if there was not a slave trade market.
Yes,
all of those things. So we have to rebuild. We have to plug the wall from the breach that happened. We have to stop the bleeding. And then we have to demand that the government systematically repair us and return to us the wealth as it relates to the labor that our ancestors put in when they worked for free unto their deaths.
Yes.
There was no such thing as vacations back then. There was no such thing as a 401k back then. So if you total up all of the monies that were made from the labor of our people, it's been an estimation that at least at a minimum 13 to 14 trillion dollars is owed to the American descendants of slaves. And I would even say more when you look at the system and how the system
was purposely designed
designed to discriminate against African people and to not allow us to be a part of what is known as the American dream and the American society and take part of being a full-fledged citizen. So those are things that we really have to discuss. We cannot just feel like Black Lives Matter is going to do it, because it isn't going to do it. Black Lives Matter is just a small piece of the puzzle, and I think everybody has to realize that. Now everybody has jumped on the bandwagon, and we said this 2 or 3 programs ago.
Yes.
Everybody's on the bandwagon of Black Lives Matter now. You got Europeans that jumped on the bandwagon, Hispanics that jumped on the bandwagon, the US movement that jumped on the bandwagon, the LGBT community that jumped on the bandwagon.
So it's like everybody's on the bandwagon, and it's not, what is it? It should be for us.
Yes, but Black Lives Matter should stipulate Black lives. That's the whole thing. So it's Black lives that matters. So we don't mind folk coming on board to support us.
That's right.
But we have to stay focused and centered in the concept of you're repairing, we need you to repair Black lives.
But Brian, people are saying now all lives matter. We're not, their lives have always mattered. They weren't, their ancestors were not slaves.
Well, and the whole concept is if all lives matter, then blacks need to be included in all lives. So that's how simple that is. That's how powerful that is. And we're saying that the way to repair us is by systematically putting something in place that will stop the bleeding, stop the breach, stop the taking one brick off at a time as it relates to the systematic wall.
Yes.
And let's start putting those bricks back in place.
Yes.
So if we're going to focus on education reform, if we're going to focus on welfare reform as it relates to African people, specifically, we're going to focus on health reform, all of those things. There needs to be a designation that specifically and particularly points to black people, not colored people, black people. And we can make that distinction as it relates to when I say black people, I'm talking about those blacks who had family members in their lineage that were slaves.
Slaves, exactly.
So,
and that's not hard to find, is it?
That's not hard to find at all. So we have to demand that that's where the center of focus be.
Yes.
So if you had a great-great-grandmother in this country, most likely she was either just coming out of slavery or her mother was in slavery. And that's pretty simple to find out. There's nothing difficult about this. So we're not talking about colored people, because colored people would be, an example of that would be Kamala Harris. She is a colored person. She's not a black person.
Okay.
She is Brahmin, Indian, and her father was Jamaican and Brahmin. Okay, and her Jamaican father, we know
he stated
his ancestors were white slave owners. He's not from the black lineage of the Jamaicans. He's from the white lineage of the Jamaican and the Brahmin Indian part of his family. So we know that's how Kamala and his mother met in school studying, who was also Brahmin Indian. So he was part Brahmin Jamaican. She was full-blooded Brahmin Indian.
Yes.
So Kamala is not a African American. That's why she never refers to herself as black. She never refers to herself as African American. She refers to herself as a person of color and American Indian.
That's what she is.
Okay, because that's what she is. So there's a distinction there that we have to make as it relates to what people group are you repairing? You know, what people group has experienced this so-called, drawn up, imaginary, racism, this concocted idea that black people did not have souls and were less than human and could be used as chattel
and property.
Okay, so we have to determine that, and like I said, that's pretty easy to do. But we have to keep reparations at the front. Like I said, the debate is up for how reparations would be divvied out and how it would be developed concerning repairing black people. But we need to demand that that happens. The next president, whether it be Trump or Joe Biden,
doesn't matter.
Black people need to demand that the president address these issues. Because if we don't, it's going to continue to deteriorate, and they're going to continue to bring in classes of people and groups by way of immigration. That's why immigration is pushed so heavy now, to continue to push black people below livable conditions to where they literally began to commit genocide themselves. And literally they forced them into extinction. Okay, so we have to deal with, we have to deal with those facts. We have to deal with that the whole system is designed to slowly weed us out of the system. So what they could not do as it relates to knowing what to do with the 4 million slaves and having a failure behind failure as it relates to programs that they put in place, starting from the Freedmen's Bureau to the Freedmen's Bank, so on and so forth. The question is still on the table. What do we do with all of these black people? Okay? If we don't demand that the repair happens, then slowly we'll continue to self-destruct. And that is by design also. That is a social engineering that has been put in place by the United States government, and I don't mind saying that, by the United States government to eradicate the problem called African people, African American people, black people. It has been socially engineered, it has been designed, and it has been working for the last 150 years plus. Okay, so if we don't wake up and recognize that, nobody should think we have arrived when the majority of our people
have not,
are still living in a condition that is below the poverty line. So we're not even, touching some of the areas that we could touch to factually show how this system was set up. And like I read from the book, how America viewed African people. That's why Hillary Clinton stated that our children were no more than super predators. She was one of the first to coin that phrase, super predator, as it relates to our young men in the ghettos and in the projects killing each other. But the term super predator came into facet when she felt like these young men in the urban areas would make their way to the suburban areas. So now you have, from that whole, phraseology and from that whole system of super predators, you see laws put in place to further imprison, laws put in place that would say if any young African American, and I'm going to say African American because our people are most affected by marijuana.
That's right.
Is caught with a little bit of marijuana, we're locking them up. We're throwing away the key. So many laws were put in place to continue to promote the doing away
with our
black people in general.
Black males.
And black males in specific. Okay? So,
I heard today, Brian, a gentleman asked, he was talking to Joe Brown, and he said, what is it with them wanting to destroy the black male? I don't even get it. What is it that our black men possess so much of that they want to demolish the black male?
There's a good book out called The Destruction of the Black Male. Now, we'll have to deal with that. We'll have to do a whole show.
Okay.
But the black seed has always been under attack. If you wipe out the black seed, then you wipe out the core of the family as it relates to African children having an opportunity to come up in a system where codes are put in place, moralities are put in place, certain disciplines are put in place. So the easiest way to do away with the black family is to do away with the black male. That's why you have a hyper, if I can say this, a hyper sensitive society now as it relates to African American males and homosexuality. Okay, you see the promotion of that.
Yes.
Because it takes the black male out of the family. But like I said, we'll have to deal with that on another show, and that needs to be dealt with.
It does.
We need to talk about why the attack on black males. That's why you see that majority of the lynchings in slavery were black males. 90% were black males. Okay, so the black male has always been under attack. All right, and we need to talk about that. We need to talk about why the divine seed has been targeted to be rooted out of this particular earth realm. Okay, so we'll deal with the spiritual connotations of that as well.
Okay.
Because there is a spiritual reason that Europeans target black men. Okay, so when you see police brutality, that's why majority of police brutality is on black men. Okay, and we know even now, because of the brutality of some of these officers not having consciousness, they are even attacking our black women now. So the devaluing of black life crosses the board now. It's not just the black men now. We're seeing our women maligned and attacked just as much now as the black men. But the whole system was designed to eradicate the black male seed, because there's a divine part of the black male seed that is interwoven into the universal concept of creation. So we'll talk about that on another show.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys for watching today. We're with you every Sunday evening, same time, 6:30 p.m. We're so glad for those of you that join us today. And I want to again encourage you, those that are up for local elections in those areas, in those districts, please get out and vote this Tuesday.
Yes.
And definitely know the platform. Before you check that box and before you click that button, know what that person is
Represents.
representing for your district or for your city. That is so important. You know, like I said, we vote based on who we know,
Right.
if it's a friend or if it's somebody that we really feel close to. But we need to know what they're going to do. What is the platform? So that is very, very important. And that needs to be at the height of every conversation from now until Tuesday. Because our vote really matters on the local level.
Absolutely.
More than anything. That's where it counts. If we can hit the local, then we're dependent on them to take it higher. So definitely your local, on your local level, that's where it counts. I'm wishing you much, much peace and blessings throughout the week. And be safe and know that God loves you and we do too.
Bye-bye, family.
Bye-bye.